The most dangerous moment with an unstable toxic person is not when they are shouting, attacking, or pushing you away. It is when they suddenly go completely quiet, and it feels like you never even existed to them. When a manipulative person does this one specific thing, they are not coming back. They are not coming back to explain, they are not coming back to apologize, and they are not even coming back to hurt you again. Most people do not realize this until it is already over. If this echoes your experience, if you have felt that eerie silence and wondered why it hurt more than the loud chaos, pause for a moment, take a breath, and stay with this conversation, because understanding this precise moment is often the turning point where your true healing finally begins. When they are done, the relationship simply ends. But the illusion shatters for you, and that is not weakness, that is your awakening. When a narcissist is truly finished with you, there is no big explosion. There is no dramatic exit and no final argument that gives you clarity. That loud discard people usually expect is actually a sign of unfinished business. Rage, insults, blocking, smear campaigns, and sudden pullbacks are all emotional behaviors. Emotional behavior means an attachment still exists in some way. When they are genuinely finished, the shift is much quieter and far more unsettling. It feels like the lights went out in a room you were still standing in. One moment you were the central focus of their attention, and the next moment you are treated as if you were never significant at all. This quiet exit happens because the toxic person no longer sees any return on their emotional investment. You are no longer providing the reactions they can feed on. You may have stopped engaging with their games, you may have stopped explaining yourself, stopped defending yourself, or simply stopped supplying the emotional intensity they require from you. At that specific point, confrontation becomes inefficient for them. Drama costs a lot of energy, and narcissists conserve their energy when the payoff is gone. This silence is not maturity, it is complete disengagement. What makes this especially destabilizing is that the narcissist does not announce this departure. There is no closure conversation because closure would require emotional acknowledgement. Instead, the contact fades out or stops abruptly. Messages go completely unanswered. Familiar daily patterns vanish. You are not told what changed because, from their perspective, nothing needs to be explained to you. They have already emotionally relocated. This is why people often feel more confused during this quiet phase than they did during the overt abuse. Your mind keeps scanning for meaning, searching for a final clue, or looking for something to respond to, but there is absolutely nothing to push against. That sudden absence creates deep self-doubt. You start questioning whether you imagined the connection, whether you ever mattered at all, or whether you did something unforgivable to cause this. That confusion is not accidental. It is a direct byproduct of being discarded without a narrative. The quiet exit also protects the narcissist's self-image. Leaving loudly risks exposure, conflict, or accountability. Leaving silently allows them to preserve the fantasy that the relationship simply dissolved on its own. The message being communicated, not through words but through total disappearance, is that you are not worth explaining things to. Emotional detachment is far more final than rage, insults, or even a dramatic discard, because rage still contains a connection. Anger is a form of emotional engagement. Yelling, blaming, threatening, or punishing means the narcissist is still invested in your reaction. They still want to be seen, felt, feared, or validated by you. Even cruelty requires attention to work. When a narcissist is angry with you, you still matter in their internal world. You still occupy space in their mind. You still have the power to affect their emotional state, and that power is exactly what sustains the dynamic. Detachment is entirely different. Detachment means you no longer register as emotionally relevant to them. Your pain does not activate them. Your silence does not provoke them. Your presence does not energize them anymore. This is not growth or healing on their part. It is psychological withdrawal. They have shut down the emotional channel entirely because it no longer serves their personal needs. Where rage says you hurt me or you challenge my control, detachment says you are no longer worth emotional investment. This is why detachment feels colder and more destabilizing than active abuse. Abuse gives your nervous system something to respond to. Detachment gives it absolutely nothing. The human brain is wired to seek resolution through interaction, even if it is painful interaction. When that interaction disappears, the bond does not instantly dissolve for you. Instead, it lingers unanswered. You may replay old conversations, search for hidden meaning, or wait for a response that never comes. Meanwhile, the narcissist has already emotionally exited. Detachment also protects the narcissist's fragile self-image. Rage risks exposure because arguments can reveal cracks in their armor. Detachment avoids accountability altogether. By disengaging emotionally, they avoid reflection, remorse, or repair. They do not have to admit any wrongdoing if they simply stop caring. This allows them to move on without ever confronting the harm they caused, rewriting the history of the relationship as insignificant rather than failed. For the person left behind, this emotional cutoff can feel like complete erasure. This happens not because the relationship lacked meaning, but because it had meaning to only one side in a sustainable way. The silence communicates a brutal message. It does not say that you were wrong, but rather that you are no longer necessary. That realization often hurts more than any insult ever could. Indifference is the true ending because it signals the complete absence of emotional investment. Cruelty, manipulation, and even sudden abandonment still carry an emotional charge. They are active behaviors that require attention, intention, and engagement. Indifference requires none of that. When a narcissist becomes indifferent, you no longer serve any psychological function in their inner world. You are not someone to dominate, punish, impress, or extract emotion from. You are simply irrelevant to them. This is why indifference feels so dehumanizing to experience. Human beings are wired to measure connection through emotional response. Even negative attention confirms your existence, but indifference denies it entirely. When a narcissist reaches this stage, they do not try to win arguments, defend their actions, or reshape your perception. They stop caring how you see them because your perception no longer matters. Your feelings, your confusion, and even your intense pain no longer register as meaningful stimuli to them. Indifference also explains the sudden emotional flatness people describe. There is no anger to respond to, no warmth to reach for, and no tension to resolve. Communication, if it exists at all, becomes purely mechanical or non-existent. The warmth that once hooked you is gone, and the hostility that once terrified you is gone too. What remains is total emotional emptiness. This is not peace, it is an absolute absence. For many survivors, this phase triggers a deeper grief than the abuse itself. Abuse allows you to believe the relationship still has some emotional substance, even if it is highly toxic. Indifference forces you to confront the reality that the emotional reciprocity you were fighting for never truly existed. The bond you felt was completely real to you, but it was conditional and easily replaceable to them. Indifference also serves a protective function for the narcissist because it prevents introspection. Caring, even in a negative way, could lead to guilt, shame, or responsibility. Indifference shuts those doors completely. By emotionally nullifying you, they can move forward without integrating the reality of what they did or how it affected you. This is why chasing explanations during this phase only deepens your wound. You are seeking meaning from someone who has already emotionally exited the building. The lack of response is the response. Indifference is not a phase to work through. It is the psychological endpoint, and recognizing that truth, as painful as it is, often marks the beginning of reclaiming your own emotional reality. Narcissists do not stop engaging because they suddenly gained insight or emotional maturity. They stop because they have secured replacement supply. This is one of the hardest truths to accept because it dismantles the hope that their disappearance means reflection, remorse, or personal growth. In reality, their emotional system is entirely transactional. When one source stops producing admiration, validation, obedience, or emotional intensity, they redirect their attention elsewhere. The shift can appear abrupt to you, but internally it is often calculated and already underway long before you notice. Replacement supply does not have to be better, healthier, or more compatible than you were. It only has to be new. Novelty provides them with fresh stimulation. A fresh person has not yet set boundaries, has not yet challenged the narrative, and has not yet seen behind the mask. That makes them highly efficient for the narcissist's needs. Once that new source is in place, the old source becomes completely unnecessary. This is why the emotional cutoff feels so sudden. You are not being left because you failed. You are being left because you are no longer exploitable. In the same way, this replacement explains the chilling calm that follows their departure. There is no longing, no processing, and no grief on their end. Emotional energy has already been fully reassigned elsewhere, while you are still metabolizing the loss, replaying moments, and searching for meaning. They are already mirroring someone new. They are telling a revised version of their story, and they are positioning themselves as unchanged and unaffected. The speed of this transition can feel like a deep betrayal layered on top of abandonment. What makes this especially destabilizing is that narcissists rarely announce this shift. There is no honest admission of moving on to someone else. Instead, you may sense it through their emotional absence, delayed responses, or sudden disinterest. If they are confronted, they may deny it or minimize it because transparency would expose the mechanics of their behavior. Acknowledging a replacement supply would require them to confront their own toxic patterns, and patterns threaten their perfect self-image. Understanding this quiet end lets you stop waiting for a ghost to speak. When the silence becomes absolute, it is your signal to stop looking backward. The absence of their voice is not your failure, it is your freedom. Turn that emotional energy back toward yourself because your healing does not require their explanation. Have you noticed this shift from chaos to sudden silence in your own life? This is also why trying to compete or prove your worth at this stage is so incredibly damaging to you. You are no longer dealing with a normal relational dynamic. You are trapped inside a supply economy that you never agreed to join. Their sudden departure is not a final verdict on your human value or your replaceability as a person. It is simply clear evidence of how they choose to regulate themselves emotionally. Once the specific function you served for them is outsourced to someone else, the attachment dissolves without ceremony. This leaves you completely alone to process an ending that they already abandoned internally a long time ago. Closure is never given when a narcissist is truly finished with a relationship. This happens because providing closure requires a genuine recognition of impact, and recognition directly threatens their fragile self-concept. To offer you closure, they would have to acknowledge that something real actually occurred between the two of you. They would have to admit that real emotions were involved, and that their personal actions had real consequences. That level of honest acknowledgement introduces personal accountability, and accountability immediately destabilizes the carefully constructed narrative they live inside every day. So instead of ending things with clarity, they choose to end them with total absence. This complete lack of closure is not accidental or careless on their part. It is entirely protective. By refusing to explain, discuss, or process the ending of the relationship, the narcissist successfully maintains psychological control even during their disengagement. You are left holding all the unanswered questions while they walk away completely unburdened by the wreckage. The power imbalance continues to exist, just in a much quieter form. You are desperately searching for meaning while they have already erased the need for any meaning at all. People very often misinterpret this silence as confusion or emotional overwhelm on the narcissist's part. In reality, it is nothing more than pure avoidance. Having honest conversations about endings invites deep reflection, and reflection always invites internal shame. Rather than risk experiencing that internal discomfort, they choose to opt out of the conversation entirely. Your messages go completely unanswered. Your attempts to talk things through are completely ignored or met with vague, dismissive responses. The door is not loudly slammed shut. Instead, it is left hanging open just enough to keep you permanently suspended in midair. This suspended state is deeply distressing to experience because the human nervous system naturally seeks resolution. You may find yourself constantly replaying past interactions, endlessly rewriting text messages in your head, or imagining one final conversation that will finally make everything make sense. But receiving closure from a narcissist is a total contradiction. They are entirely invested in protecting themselves, not in helping you heal from the damage. Any explanation they might actually offer you would be self-serving, heavily distorted, or completely incomplete. It would often be much more confusing than helpful to your recovery. The absence of closure also allows them to safely rewrite the story in private. Without a final conversation, there is no shared ending to the relationship. There is only their convenient version of events and your lingering questions. This allows them to minimize the relationship, deny its importance, or recast themselves as the reasonable person who simply moved on with their life. You are left entirely without a narrative anchor, which can make your loss feel completely unreal and invalidating. Understanding that closure will never come from them is a very painful but absolutely necessary shift for your healing. The silence is not a complex puzzle for you to solve. The silence itself is the final conclusion. The clarity you are seeking cannot be extracted from someone who completely refuses to emotionally acknowledge what occurred between you. When you finally stop waiting for answers from them, you begin the slow process of generating your own personal meaning. This meaning is grounded not in their sudden absence, but in your own lived reality. Your confusion is not a personal failure, and it is not a sign that you are a weak person. It is simply the evidence of psychological whiplash created by a sudden emotional disappearance. When a narcissist is completely done, the ending does not follow normal human relational rules. There is no gradual distancing, there is no honest conversation, and there is no mutual understanding reached. Instead, the emotional connection collapses entirely without explanation, leaving your mind desperately trying to reconcile two completely incompatible realities. You are stuck trying to connect the intense warmth that once existed with the absolute emptiness that followed it. This confusion arises because the entire bond was built on inconsistency from the very beginning. Periods of intense attention, intimacy, or validation were always followed by sudden withdrawal, harsh criticism, or cold distance. Your nervous system adapted to this constant unpredictability by staying completely alert, searching for hidden patterns, and trying to anticipate their next emotional shift. When the narcissist finally disengages completely, that internal scanning system does not just shut off automatically. It keeps scanning for cues that are no longer coming. The silence becomes much louder than any argument you ever had. Many people mistake this intense confusion for lingering attachment or a personal failure to move on from the relationship. In truth, it is simply the painful residue of long-term emotional conditioning. You were carefully trained to respond, to repair, and to constantly self-correct in order to restore the connection whenever they pulled away. When there is no longer anything left to respond to, your brain naturally fills in the empty gaps with self-doubt. You may wonder if you completely misread everything, if you imagined the closeness, or if you were somehow responsible for the abrupt ending. That questioning is not true insight, it is just total disorientation. The narcissist, meanwhile, is not confused at all. Their clarity comes directly from emotional disengagement, not from true understanding. They did not process the ending of the relationship, they simply exited it. That massive asymmetry is exactly what creates the painful imbalance between you. One person is left trying to make sense of a story that ended without a final chapter, while the other person has already replaced the entire book with a new one. This is why your confusion often peaks after the contact stops completely, rather than before. The sudden absence of stimulation removes the familiar chaos that once kept your focus directed outward. Without that chaos, your mind naturally turns inward, searching for coherence and logic. But coherence can never be found in a dynamic that was never built on emotional reciprocity in the first place. Recognizing that your confusion is a predictable response to an unnatural ending is absolutely crucial for your recovery. It successfully shifts the question from what is wrong with me to what actually happened to me. That specific reframing is often the very first step toward regaining your psychological footing. It places the confusion exactly where it belongs, as a direct consequence of severe emotional abandonment rather than a reflection of your human worth or your perception of reality. The silence that follows is not a calm, mutual space, and it is not emotional peace. It is entirely deliberate. When a narcissist goes completely silent after being done with you, that silence serves a very specific function. It allows them to disengage without any confrontation, avoid all accountability, and maintain a false sense of control without having to actively exert it. Silence becomes a calculated strategy, not a reflection of inner stability. This strategic silence works so well because it shifts the entire emotional burden directly onto you. When you inherit that emotional burden, your mind goes into overdrive trying to carry it. You shoulder the weight of their silence, treating it like a riddle that contains the secret to your worth. But a strategic silence cannot be negotiated with, and it cannot be reasoned out. It is designed to be a wall that you exhaust yourself trying to climb. The moment you realize that the wall was built to protect their illusions, not to punish your flaws, is the moment you can choose to stop climbing. You can simply turn around and walk away from the structure entirely. The silence then ceases to be a prison and begins to transform into a boundary. It becomes a space where their noise can no longer reach you, and where their transactional views of humanity can no longer diminish your self-esteem. They may have walked away unburdened by their actions, but by leaving you out of their narrative, they also left you free to write your own. You no longer have to accommodate a distorted version of reality just to keep a connection alive. The clarity you were searching for in their words is finally found in their complete disappearance. This means your healing does not require an admission of guilt from them, and it does not require a late-night apology text. It requires you to look at the empty space they left behind and accept it as the final answer. The story is over, not because it was resolved beautifully, but because the other actor left the stage. And when the stage is empty, the lights can finally come up on your own life again. You can begin to rebuild your world based on consistency, honesty, and real emotional reciprocity. Have you started to feel that shift toward creating your own closure yet?